A friend of mine once said, "Your music to me is always hopeful," and that was like one of the nicest things anybody ever could have said to me. That sometimes even when it I'm Roland Martin, known to my friends as Ron, and I started piano lessons at the age of 6, maybe a little bit late to start, but stuck with it even though there were many times I wanted to quit. But in high school, I had some good teachers, and my music theory teacher in high school was amazing, and I would say she would be probably the one of the biggest influences on me in terms of making a career out of music. So at Calvary, I'm director of music, and that entails primarily directing the choir, playing the organ for services, running the concert series, Great Music at Calvary, um, various things of that nature. And I am still at the university as a professor of organ and harpsichord in my 39th year. Started when I was 11. But I have retired from most of my other things, teaching. I was teaching at Buffalo Seminary for 16 years. At some point, my job at the university was bigger with the opera department, but when that sort of phased out, um, I I think music um, has to reach the heart, but I also think that if it's not well crafted, it's not going to stay around. More on that later. In high school, when I was composing, it was very derivative. I wrote music like the music I was playing. So any of my piano music sounded like Chopin or whatever I happened to be working on. I would say by my graduate school years, I had definitely evolved to a certain recognizable voice, distinct in some ways. I mean, in others, it might not sound much different from somebody else, but there's certain fingerprints I think I have in my music that probably began in my early 20s. Well, rising intervals of fifths and sixths, falling intervals of fifths. I mean, to be technical about it, but otherwise, a friend of mine once said, "Your music to me is always hopeful," and that was like one of the nicest things anybody ever could have said to me. That sometimes even when it's very dark, I wrote an instrumental piece a few years ago on the death of my oldest son, and it's an elegy, but it's very, very dark and very, very intense. But at the end, there's sort of an apotheosis of a very hopeful kind of ending, very peaceful ending. I think the other thing that is kind of a fingerprint is I love counterpoint. When you've got multiple layers, multiple lines of music going on, sometimes the same line, so like a canon or sort of a round going on, right? One voice starts it and the other follows it. It's considered the most difficult musical technique to compose in. So whoever wrote "Row, Row, Row Your Boat" was brilliant. Also, fugal technique, where you kind of take that, it's like a canon on steroids, but you've got a little bit more freedom in fugal technique. There's always, always a challenge. The creative process too is always different. Sometimes you just struggle with something, and when you finish, it might sound like perfectly natural and like it just sprung into your head, but it was maybe something I wrestled with for months. Other times, sometimes I can sit and read a poem and I'm hearing the music in my head. That's rare. That's really rare. But it does happen once in a while. I absolutely have moments of great inspiration and moments of months, sometimes, of drought, yes, where nothing seems to be going the way you want it to. Often just by putting something aside, you come back to it afresh. I would say the first is great poetry. I have a large collection of books of poetry. And when I find something good, something that really speaks to me, that's just a really great influence. I think another influence is just some of the great composers of past and present that have written wonderful things, and sometimes I think, oh, I wish I had done that, and maybe I'll try my hand at something similar. And third, I would say again what I said earlier about counterpoint. I love the interplay of all these voices going on simultaneously. And by voices, I don't necessarily mean singers. Could be instrumental voices, but just the interplay of things, especially when they're imitating each other and not just static. I don't like static very well. A requiem is technically, originally, a mass for the dead. So Missa Defunctorum or Officium Defunctorum, Missa Pro Defunctis. It had a lot of these names in Latin. And you have, the original ones are in plain song, Gregorian chant. And then composers in the Renaissance started using those chants and then writing all this beautiful polyphony around them. There are quite a few of those. They're very beautiful, very serene. They tended to leave out some of the grisly parts about the Dies Irae, day of wrath and anger, when you're going to burn in hell kind of thing. And those were left to just be chanted. In the Baroque period, we don't get very many settings of it at all, but then in the classical period, of course, the big one is the Mozart Requiem, a piece that everybody loves, great piece. And he does set the Dies Irae, the really, kind of nasty bits of text. As we go through time, some of that changes. The Berlioz Requiem, in his Dies Irae, he's got, I think, 2 choirs on the stage with the orchestra, plus a boys' choir. And then he's got a brass ensemble in all 4 corners of the auditorium, each one with 4 kettle drums. So 16 of them playing in chords. Talk about day of wrath, And then you get, some decades later, the Verdi Requiem. Again, a very operatic setting, and his setting of the Dies Irae is just, well, hell-raising to be quite factual about it. But then at the end of the century, maybe it's early 20th, I can't remember now, Gabriel Fauré, French composer, wrote one where he thought, I don't want to scare the bejesus out of people. I want to comfort the living. And so he stuck to the texts in the Requiem Mass that were comforting. Texts about eternal rest and about light and achieving the light of heaven. Maurice Duverflay in the mid-20th century followed Fauré's example, wrote one very similar in style. But then after that, we have composers bringing in texts that are not part of the original Requiem Mass, Psalms. So 2 years ago here at Calvary, I came in to conduct the John Rutter Requiem. The first movement is the traditional one from the Requiem Mass. Requiem aeternam dona eis Domine et lux perpetua lucea eis. So that's eternal rest grant to them, and let light perpetual shine upon them. So, and then that goes into Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. But Rutter used for his next movement, Psalm 130, out of the depths I cry to thee. So quite dark. You are calling out of desperation from the depths of despair, and the psalm ends, O Israel, hope in the Lord. right? So it's this movement from darkness to light, and that's exactly what I think of my Requiem as. It's going from darkness to light. John Rutter uses the 23rd Psalm, "The Lord is my shepherd," in his setting. I use, in about the same place in mine, Psalm 121, "I will lift up mine eyes to the hills." So those are parts of it that are not traditionally parts of the Requiem. So it's these days, I would say it's not so much, we're not talking about a Mass for the Dead, we're talking about a piece in memory of those we've loved, and a piece that is there to comfort the living more than to plead for the souls of the dead, that they not be chained to hell for eternity, which is what traditional Requiem Masses did, right? We'll be performing it here at Calvary Church on November 3rd at 7 o'clock in the evening. We're joined by the choir of Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Buffalo, and Buffalo Chamber Players will be forming the orchestra, which I think is 23 or 24 players. And they're all Philharmonic players, so that makes it really nice. The first one is practice. How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. But whether you're a performing musician, nobody would attempt to play a Beethoven sonata or a Mozart piano concerto without first practicing their scales. You've got to have the technique, right? So get the foundation. No amount of inspiration is going to save you if you haven't got the foundation of technique. Same thing for a composer. I would say, study composers of the past first, get the compositional technique down, write canons, write fugues. Doesn't matter if you'll ever write them in your own style, in your own voice later on, but get the technique, get the foundations, then go. First off, it's not a chicken farm. I have 12 chickens. I have 2 coops and a chicken run. I raise them organically, so good, healthy eggs. They're not meat birds, they're egg layers, that's all. So bring the kids out. I bought a piece of property right on Lake Ontario, 2 acres of land, and a house. And I did something I've wanted to do for 30, 35 years, and that is plant an orchard of heirloom varieties of apples, rare apples that you can't get at any farm stand. I also wanted a grove of pawpaw trees. I just got my first ones this year, this size, great big things, and unbelievable taste. I was invited by the University of Iceland at Reykjavik, what year was that, 2016 I think, to give a lecture on William Butler Yeats and his plays that he did in the style of Japanese no theater, so very specialized kind of thing. I've given some lectures on astrophysics, particularly with regard to Johannes Kepler, and we're taking new looks at his writings now, and finding that there is actually some validity in all that, and the music of the spheres and that sort of thing. Pythagoras, I've done a lot of study with that, and some talks in various places on those topics.